Little girl ran to the mechanic crying, "They're beating my mama." What he did next left everyone in shock. In a quiet suburban town in Texas, Ethan Cole wiped his hands on a rag, finishing the last repair on a rusted old truck. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across his small garage. He loved the smell of oil and grease. It reminded him of steady work and simpler times. The garage was silent, except for the occasional drip of oil and the hum of the overhead light. Ethan had been alone most of the afternoon, tinkering with engines and listening to classic rock. It was just another normal day until a sudden scream shattered the calm. A little girl, no older than 7, came running through the garage door. Her brown hair was messy, and tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. "They're beating my mama!" she cried, her small hands clutching Ethan's arm tightly. Ethan dropped his wrench and knelt down to meet her wide, terrified eyes. His heart raced. The girl's voice trembled with panic, but there was no mistaking the urgency in her words. Ethan held her gently and asked her to take a deep breath, promising he would help. The little girl hiccuped through her sobs and tried to explain what had happened. Through her shaky words, Ethan pieced together the situation. Her mother, a hard-working single mom, had been confronted by 2 men demanding money she didn't have. They had threatened her and become violent when she tried to defend herself. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had faced bullies and trouble before in the neighborhood, but seeing fear and helplessness in a child's eyes sparked a protective fire in him. Without thinking twice, he stood and gestured for the girl to stay behind him. His mind was racing, but he stayed calm, trying to formulate a plan. Ethan's eyes scanned the garage. Tools, chains, and wrenches lay scattered across the floor. He grabbed a heavy wrench just in case and dialed the police, giving them the address and explaining the situation. His voice was steady, but every second felt like an eternity. Outside, the girl's mother struggled to keep the attackers away, shouting for help. Ethan took a deep breath, then stepped out into the driveway. His presence alone was commanding. "Leave her alone." "Now," he said firmly, his tone carrying authority that made the men pause. The attackers laughed initially, underestimating Ethan's resolve. But when they saw the little girl behind him, trusting and afraid, their confidence faltered. The tension was thick, and just as Ethan had hoped, the distant wail of approaching sirens made them reconsider. They muttered threats, but eventually fled down the street. Ethan immediately went to the girl, crouching to reassure her. Her sobs slowly turned into quiet sniffles, and she clung to him as her mother rushed forward. Ethan watched as mother and daughter embraced, relief washing over both of them. The moment was raw and emotional, and although he didn't see himself as a hero, he knew he had changed the course of their day. Once the attackers had fled and the distant sound of sirens faded, Ethan led the little girl back toward her mother. Her face was streaked with tears, but relief now softened her expression. The mother, exhausted and shaken, dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Ethan watched quietly, feeling a mix of satisfaction and lingering adrenaline. The neighborhood had a way of noticing small acts of courage, but Ethan didn't need recognition. For him, seeing the family safe was reward enough. The moment felt heavy yet comforting, a rare mix of fear and relief. Her mother looked up at Ethan, eyes glistening. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice trembling. Ethan shrugged modestly. "Just doing what anyone should do," he replied softly. She studied him for a moment, taking in the grease-stained coveralls and tired expression, and nodded with gratitude. The little girl, still holding on to her mother, peeked at Ethan shyly. Despite the chaos, a sense of trust had formed. In that quiet driveway, bonds were created in a way words couldn't fully capture. Ethan realized that small towns thrived on acts like these, where courage met everyday life. The police arrived moments later and took statements from everyone involved. They reassured the family and promised to investigate further. Ethan waited patiently, standing slightly apart, making sure the little girl and her mother were calm. Once the officers left, the family thanked him again. They offered to drive him home, but he declined. He had a truck to finish and engines to repair, life continuing as normal despite the extraordinary events. Yet something had shifted in the air, a sense of safety restored, trust rebuilt, and a subtle understanding that heroes sometimes came in ordinary forms. In the days that followed, news of Ethan's courage spread quietly through the neighborhood. Friends and neighbors stopped by the garage, offering smiles, waves, and small tokens of appreciation. Ethan remained humble, continuing his work as usual, but he couldn't help noticing the change around him. People who had felt isolated suddenly seemed more connected. Even the little girl began visiting the garage after school, watching him work and learning to trust in someone who had protected her. The routine hum of engines and tools became a backdrop to laughter and gratitude. Ethan reflected on the events while tightening bolts on an old engine one afternoon. Life was often quiet, predictable, and sometimes lonely. Yet moments like these reminded him of why he stayed in the small town, repairing trucks and lending a hand. Courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it quietly stood between fear and harm, making a difference without seeking applause. As the sun set over his garage, Ethan smiled faintly, thinking of the mother and daughter safe inside their home. He returned to his work, knowing that his life had intersected with theirs in a way that would be remembered long after the grease stains were gone.